Hey everyone, my name is Nick Lambert. I'm the CEO of Doc, and welcome to Identi3, a podcast all about Web3 and digital identity. I have the pleasure today of being joined by Gautam Hazari. He's the CTO of Sekura.id. Gautam, many thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Nick, and my pleasure.
Great. Well, yeah, could you do me a favor and introduce yourself to our listeners? And as you do that over kind of a couple of minutes, it would be great if you could explain what originally attracted you to the world of digital identity.
Thanks, Nick. So I have been in the telecom space for a long time. And this is where the identity story started for me as well. So I have been with Vodafone Group for around 14, 15 years. And mostly in the technology space and beyond as well. One of the things that I realized while in Vodafone and also working with telcos is we have an inertia in the digital space, especially around identity. So identity is a problem, but due to the inertia, we don't really realize that we need to solve it, right? We use stopgap measures like passwords, OTPs, even biometrics, right? But there is one service which we use almost on a daily basis. It's a digital service which we cannot even live without. We even invented a name for the fear of losing it, nomophobia, and that's the mobile phone, right? When you need to make a phone call, you don't need to even think of solving the identity problem. No one challenges you saying, hey, prove you are Gautam, then only you can actually make a phone call. So how do they do that? So there is a technical solutions already there which has solved that identity problem, which is in sync with how we identify ourselves in the organic world. So Nick, you addressed me as Gautam. Even before that, you didn't challenge me to prove that I'm Gautam, right? In the organic world, things work slightly differently. So anyway, so that's something that I realized that the telecom world, especially the mobile operators, have solved it. Then I moved to GSMA, and then the purpose was exactly that, identity. The GSMA, as you know, is the trade organization of all mobile operators around the world. They were starting to think, the GSMA board was starting to think that maybe mobile operators' assets, primarily the SIM and beyond, can help in solving the identity problem. And then they approached me saying that, hey, you have been talking about identity for long. Do you want to come and see what we can do? That's where I went to GSMA and then started this initiative called Mobile Connect. And then the idea was exactly that, to solve the identity crisis, as I call it, in the internet world. So that's how I ended up in identity, and I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, and so you've obviously been immersed in the mobile space, it seems, from your background and what you just explained, Gautam. Can you provide an overview of how mobile identity verification works?
Sure, Nick. Before that, I'll just touch upon on how do I see the identity kind of span across between organic identity, digital identity, and mobile identity. That might help why I keep saying that the mobile identity probably is a solution to the identity crisis in there. And I talked a bit in my TEDx talk on this as well. In the organic world, as we were just talking about that, the identity works slightly differently. It works in a passive way. When we meet someone, it's the responsibility of the person who is identifying to solve that identity verification. And you use multiple, terminologies like authentication, authorization, identity verification, and so on. But at the end of the day, we need to establish the identity of the individual, in the context. But the responsibility is purely onto me. If I need to identify, the responsibility up to me. And we are gifted by nature in all sorts of, psychological mechanisms, past personal narratives, to do that, right? We use gestures, we use facial, we use voice, we use context as well. That person is supposed to be at that location at that moment of time. So those kind of context, that's how we do it without challenging, right? Sometimes we may ask some questions, but in order to understand, not to challenge. In the digital world, because, and again, let's face it, the internet was never designed to identify the human users. It was designed to identify computers. That's why there are IP addresses. It would have been good if all humans had an IP address, or may not be good, don't know. But anyways, and that created so many problems, right? Because it's not designed fundamentally to identify the human users, and the human users started to use it. Then how do you identify them, right? We started to use, and in the initial phase of the web, what I call the internet of content, although that's not a common terminology, but that's what it is, right? In the initial version of the web 1, we never needed to identify the user because it was read-only, right? You sit back and read and consume the content. The services didn't care who is reading it. But when it happened to be Web 2, when the interaction started to happen, you need to identify. When commerce started to happen, you needed to identify. Then there was no identity layer. It was too late, right? How did we identify it? We ditched how it works in the organic world, and we started to use a challenge. The first thing that we did in a right way as well, we don't trust who the person is, in the digital world behind the scene. So we said that you need to prove who you are, which is different to how it works in the organic world. How did we do it? The first thing that we started to do, which I hate, is password. And this is why I had to do that TED talk where I said that that's the worst thing that we have done. And as we know, that password is one of the longest surviving technology on earth. We started to challenge the user saying that, hey, prove that you're Gautam. Then I need to prove that I know the password of Gautam. That's why it's me, right? And if you see the Verizon data breach investigation report, for the last 5 years, 81% of all data breaches in the digital world is related to password. And we have been talking about all sorts of technological things that kills password. And at the moment, 300 billion passwords are used. Anyways, then we added additional things in the digital world to solve the digital identity, like OTPs, SMS OTPs, even biometrics. Still, it's not solving the problem, right? Now let's go to mobile identity. And this is what I started to say, why I got excited about that, right? If you see it in a way that it is actually the way the mobile operators, for example, identifying me as the person who is making the phone call or receiving the phone call, they don't really challenge me. They actually identify me, verify me, authenticate me, even authorize me without involving me. They do it themselves. That doesn't mean it's not secure. It's actually extremely secure because it's not involving me. Me as the human user is the weakest link. They do it using some sort of, passive technology. And that's what is the power of mobile identity. Now, if I started to talk about that the internet was not designed to identify the human users. The equivalent internet of the telecom or the mobile ecosystem is their mobile network. From day one of the mobile network based on GSM, which used the SIM, they had an identity layer powered by the SIM. So from 1991, when the first SIM was used, there was an identity layer. And then that identity layer was fueled by the SIM. And we almost forget that the I in the SIM stands for identity. It's subscriber identity module, right? So that way, if we can actually bridge the internet of the mobile operators, which is the mobile network, into the expanded internet, then we have a solution. So that's how mobile identity basically works, and everything in between, right? The verification, the authentication, authorization, they become an enabler to solve the bigger problem.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and you do forget what SIM stands for. I'm not sure if I was asked, I'd actually even know, but that's a really good point. One thing that I found I wanted to ask about as you were talking there, and you rightly said that in the organic world, we move from a position of trust. So if I meet you in the street, Gautam, and we've had a history, like I might ask you, how your family is, and you might answer that in a way where I could know that only Gautam would know about how his kids or cousins or whatever are doing. And you mentioned that from the technical standpoint, we go from a position of lack of trust, and we hear that a lot of the time in Web3 space, where we talk about trustless and all of that kind of language. Where do you think that we went wrong in that, like, if we were to approach in a technical sense, coming from a position of trust and trusting that you are Gautam, how would you see that? How would you have implemented it differently? If you could go back in time 40, 50 years?
I would say that, we need to, if we have to go back and design it again, we need to create an identity layer which passively authenticates, identifies, authorizes the user, not actively. That's a fundamental conceptual, I would not say error, but it just happened by accident, right? So every single problem that we see in the identity space is probably related to that. All the problems that are getting accelerated through generative AI, it's again related to that, because the user is actively involved in the identity dance, and that's creating the issues, friction. And it's not just about the security and the other complications. It's the user experience as well. If I am trying to log into my social media or trying to log into the bank, that's what I want, right? I have to go through a barrier which is called that identity verification, authentication, authorization, you name it, right? No one gets excited after getting authenticated. Hey, I got authenticated. They get excited when they get the service. So if you just make that barrier invisible, then we have a winner.
And it is amazing how much of the internet, like the internet was, what it was originally designed for, and the ARPANET and stuff, and what it's now become. And it's amazing how much stuff we've needed to try and reverse engineer back into the internet, because it grew so fast and it started to be commercialized and take on a life of its own. And obviously to retrofit something becomes very, very difficult. And it's amazing. Identity layers and security layers all have to be kind of reverse engineered back into some of these systems, which obviously makes life very difficult.
Absolutely.
Gautam, you may have answered elements of this next question from some of your previous responses, but I think it would be helpful to understand what are the primary advantages of using mobile-based SIMs for identity verification over some of the other methods that we use today?
I believe SIM is one of the most valuable assets that the mobile operators have, especially in the space of identity and beyond. Previously, there used to be two unique assets from mobile operators. One used to be a network with mobility, that network which moves with you as you move. But that's kind of been challenged by other players like Elon Musk, satellite-based network, and also the Wi-Fi ecosystem has got mobility right now. But still, SIM is a unique asset. The way to look into that is how the industry is moving, right? So now you can see the industry is moving from players like Apple, even FIDO standard is based on that, and Google. They're talking about cryptographic authentication using passkeys, right? So if you see how passkeys work, and then I'll come to SIM, right? How passkeys work is very simplistic. You don't trust the overall ecosystem. You don't trust the connection. You don't even trust who the individual human legal entity or the thing which is accessing the service, but you do trust the mathematics behind the cryptography, and that's what passkeys are based on, right? So the way it works, as you know, is there is a private key sitting on the device securely somewhere in the hardware. When we need to know that this is Gautam and I claim that this is my device, there is a random challenge that gets created, and then that challenge arrives in my phone, right? And then I need the phone to digitally and cryptographically sign that challenge using the key which is uniquely given to me, and then the signature goes back to the service validates it, off you go, all good, right? So we are here trusting the cryptography. Now let's go back more than 30 years, right? 1991. How was the SIM doing all the authentication? There is a cryptographic key sitting on the SIM from 1991. The user doesn't know it. They don't need to know it as well, right? That same key is sitting right now as well. Even on an eSIM, the same key is sitting there. The SIM is a hardware which doesn't rely on the device, whether it's a low-end Android device or a very high-end iPhone 14 Pro. Still, The same SIM is there, right? So there is a cryptographic key sitting there. There are cryptographic algorithms sitting within the hardware of the SIM. How does it work? When the mobile operator needs to know that this is Gautam, when I need to make the phone call, what do? They don't challenge me. They send a random challenge text to the SIM, not the device, and ask, hey, SIM, can you please create a signature using the key which is sitting in the SIM? The SIM will create a signature using the key which is sitting in the SIM since 1991, using the algorithm which is sitting in the SIM, again since 1991. Of course, the algorithm has evolved. And then the signature comes back, they validate it. This is what is passkey right now, where the industry is moving with the big players, has been happening in the SIM from day one. So the value of the SIM is exactly that, right? Where the industry is catching up, it's been there since last 30 years. And, again, the concept is same. You are trusting the mathematics behind the cryptography, nothing else.
Fascinating. And I think, it's really amazing to hear how long it's been there. And I think that, delving that far back it just shows you how far ahead in the identity space that the telecoms industry has been versus, I guess, the kind of internet or the web has been. So that's really fascinating to hear that insight. So now looking forward then, if we can project it forward, how do you think the industry is going to shape up of mobile identity in the next 5 to 10 years, Gautam? What changes do you think we'll see there?
So first of all, there are challenges happening from the overall tech space, right? Especially from generative AI. And that challenge is accelerating, as we know. And it's not just accelerating on a yearly basis, it is accelerating in a monthly basis. What do I mean by that is, with generative AI, of course, generative AI was there since a long time. So the Transformer paper was published in 2017 by Google Brains. But with ChatGPT, it only got into popular space since last November. And then also other mechanisms like Stable Diffusion and DALL-E, where it's not just creating text content, but creating content like image and video as well. And that is challenging every possible, status quo we had in the identity space. I have seen some frauds where, all those standard phishing attacks where you will know from the email or SMS that, this is phishing because the language is bad, spelling mistakes. Now what's happening is there are open source libraries available where you can actually go through the targeted person's social media account, maybe, autonomously as well, without doing it manually. The script can go and do that. And then you extract out the information, maybe the text that they have used or their contacts have used, retrain the generative AI model using that text, and then generate the phishing text. In that case, of course, there will not be any spelling errors or language errors, but it will be extremely personalized. If, I see that text coming in and then coming from a contact or a friend or a family member, it will feel like it's coming from the family member because it's been trained using the available text of that family member, friend, or the contact, right? So that way it's becoming much, much more targeted at no cost because all these libraries are available over the internet. Secondly, with all these stable diffusion and even deepfake, with whatever is happening right now is almost invalidated or making it inferior, all those deepfake things. Because deepfake things were offline generation, right? So with stable diffusion, you can actually online create a video and audio. So you may not even be able to trust in a couple of years that it's me who is talking, right? On the wire, my voice video can be changed to someone else or the other way around, right? So that is actually invalidating majority of the active authentication mechanism, including biometrics, right? So what do we do here? Again, we can see where the industry is moving with the big players like Apple, Google moving towards cryptographic authentication. I personally believe that's where I want to see the industry moving as well. It's more towards passive authentication so that the digital identity is in sync with organic identity. It's passive, right? And when it is passive, there are multiple things we can do. One is we improve the user experience as well, right? If the user doesn't need to do anything, nothing can be better than that, right? Secondly, it improves the security, because the weakest link in this entire chain is me, the human user, right? It's always related to the human user doing things. And then if the human user is not involved, the fraudsters don't need to, impersonate, or don't have much mechanism to impersonate me. The third very important thing, which is the need on the industry right now, but we cannot do because we are relying on active authentication, is continuous authentication. Because what's happening is we assume, or continuous identification, right? We assume that at the start of the process, we will do an identity verification. When I onboard to the bank, when I onboard to, a service, I'll go through a very strong identity verification process, maybe through, artifacts provided by the state and so on, right? When I am starting the service session, when I am using the bank application for the first time for the day, right, for the session, I get authenticated, I get verified, right? And after that, the assumption is everything is fine. That's not true, because there is an attack vector that's happening right now. These fraudsters, if they need to impersonate my identity, they wait for the identity verification and authentication to be completed. After that, when the session is continuing, they do a session takeover, because they know that the assumption in the overall service space is everything will be fine after the identity verification and authentication has happened. So instead of a sit down and authentication method, we need to continuously authenticate. This is what can only be made possible when we have passive authentication. Otherwise, every few seconds, someone asks me to enter a password or an OTP or to show my face. It's not going to work. This is what mobile operators have been doing. They actually authenticate my SIM every few milliseconds. They can do it because they are doing passive authentication. And that's what I want to see the industry is moving towards. And there are enough signs that it's going towards that, using cryptographic authentication.
Fascinating. And as you were talking there, I was wondering, because we had this conversation, I can't remember if it was on this podcast or just one of the kind of intercompany calls that we were on, but we were talking about personal AIs, and I've been kind of training one as well. And the idea might be that you could obviously train that to the point where it could represent you. So originally it could start off initially with quite a simple use case. So like kind of managing text to families and friends, but actually quite quickly, because it's improving exponentially, you could have you and I talking, Gautam, basically doing this podcast again in 2 years' time. And it might be my AI talking to your AI. How do you feel about that? Like if it was sufficiently trained, and I know this is a slight segue from what we've been talking about, so apologies, but if your AI and my AI are talking, what do you think about that? Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
It's beyond good thing or bad thing that's happening, right? That's going to be a reality, as you know, right? It will create and it will throw a number of problems in completely different dimensions that we are not even looking into. And I was quite excited about this Worldcoin World.id thing. And then the reason was related to this, actually. We need to now not only solve the identity problem to differentiate or separate out the real identity from unreal identity. That unreal identity could be the fraudsters or whoever that is. Now we need to solve a problem of differentiating from real human identity, or proof of personhood as we call it right now, with an AI avatar and personal AI systems, for various reasons. Because then the target will not be the human identity. The target of these fraudsters will be to take over the personal AI representing the identity, and that will be much more easier for the fraudsters to impersonate than the real human identity.
Yeah, and I definitely want to come on to WorldCoin, because it's definitely something that we kind of picked up, and you've been one of the early adopters, I guess, or certainly one of the first to kind of go and meet one of these orbs. So I'm definitely dead keen to ask you about that one. But just to go back to kind of what we're talking about on AI and deepfakes. So are you seeing that in terms of solving the issue, and you really did a good job of highlighting all the problems and the hurt that it could cause to businesses? How would you see that? Is the solution purely kind of SIM-based from your perspective, or do you see other solutions coming into play?
So, SIM is one of the solutions. I think if we take a step back from the actual realization, I personally think that the solution conceptually, as I was mentioning, needs to be from passive authentication, where we don't actively involve, right? And there are different mechanisms to do passive authentication, right? One way, if you go to the next level for passive authentication, is to, again, relying on cryptographic authentication. And there are multiple solutions to that. SIM is great, because SIM has been doing this thing. SIM was created for that, right? It was doing this thing for the last 30 years. And, the only kind of a bit sad part is mobile operators kept it to themselves, right? It would have been great for the overall internet if it would have been opened up earlier. Anyway, that's what we are doing from Sekura.id. And then it's not just the SIM, right? As I was mentioning, Apple, Google, through passkeys, FIDO Alliance, they're doing the same, right? But if we again step back, it has to be passive authentication. Cryptographic authentication is one of the way to solve it. SIM is an implementation of that, right? Cryptography will be challenged with quantum cryptography, getting accelerated. Maybe we have, I would say, 5 to 10 years, still a long time to catch up. But at some point, we will have to figure out other passive authentication mechanisms, maybe through AI as well, right? One of the things that I believe can help as well is through, for example, behavioral biometrics as well. That can do passively as well, right? So all these mobile devices, they have got so many sensors packed in right now, right? So there's an accelerometer, there's a gyroscope, there's a magnetometer, altimeter. So the way I hold my phone, so if you just take the accelerometer, right? So there is a point in XYZ axis which is unique to me. And there will be collision, there will be others who will be holding probably exactly the same way. But then you add other things as well in there, right? The height, the micro vibration that it can pick in, the magnetic strength of Earth. And in Android devices, there are 14 sensors, right? In iPhone, there are more sensors. Now, if you can train a machine learning model, so basically use AI for the benefit, and then create a unique signature. So by just holding it, I will know that, the system will know that it's me, passively. Again, I'm not saying that's the only solution. That could be another solution which is beyond cryptography to utilize AI. Again, the concept is same. It's passive authentication without challenging me, without involving me. Because even for AI to challenge a passive authentication is going to be tricky, because there is no one to challenge, right? The user is not even involved.
Yeah, and probably worth highlighting my pet peeve of people that walk along the street and hold out their mobile phone like that. I don't know why people do that and don't hold it up to their ear, but yeah, that could be a kind of marker for confirming who the individual is. Yeah, interesting. And I also wanted to go on, because the Worldcoin is definitely fascinating. I think everyone in the world of identity, it's a very kind of polarizing, I would say, technology, because the potential and power of it is significant, particularly when we look at how pervasive ChatGPT has become in the last, I guess, year, very much so, but obviously before that as well. What can you tell us about your experience with Worldcoin? A lot of people are concerned about that technology, but were you going on that journey because you're just a technologist keen to understand, or is that a concept that you particularly like, or was it something else?
There are definitely concerns there. Of course, my technology hat was there, that curiosity, but I was more interested in the discussion points that it is bringing in, and that's important for me. Okay, so there are a few I will highlight. The first one is basically we need to solve now the problem, as we were talking about earlier, to differentiate real human identity from identity proxying through AI. And that discussion is being triggered or at least been accelerated by not Worldcoin, but World.id. World.id was more kind of interesting for me, right? So that problem is there, we need to solve it. Worldcoin is trying to solve it through this orb, which, that implementation is questionable, but at least that discussion is triggered. The second discussion is, which is related to Worldcoin, is not related to identity, but this is UBI, the Universal Basic Income, right? That discussion is important as well for the society. The other important thing there is reliance on hardware. which at some point we were kind of diluting. We relied a lot on software, which is great. But then with this, let's say, all the security aspects, especially with AI coming into the forefront, that's getting challenged. So we need to more and more rely on hardwares as well. And that doesn't mean expensive hardwares. We can actually reuse hardwares which we are carrying around, like what Apple is doing with the mobile phones, right? We are carrying the mobile phone. You don't need to carry another hardware. Like in the past, we were using those RSA tokens. That doesn't work. If I am asked to carry another gadget, it doesn't work. If I am reusing hardware that I am carrying along anyway, like the mobile phone, what passkeys are doing, or the SIM, which I am carrying since 1991, right? So reliance on hardware. Worldcoin or World ID is actually putting that discussion in the forefront with the orb. Again, I don't really, like that you need another hardware. There are other ways to do that. The another thing is related to this zero trust models, right? One interesting thing that World ID brought in is putting the ZKP, the zero knowledge proof, into the discussion. Although I don't really like the way they have done it. I'll just mention that why. So what they do is when you scan your iris in this very interesting orbs, you have a choice where you can say that what should happen with your iris, right? It's an edge device. It's connected to the internet, but it still is an edge device. So you have a choice as an individual, as an owner of my own identity, to say that create a derivative of my iris as a biometric signature, and that biometric signature is a derivative of my iris, not the actual iris scan, and send and use only that derivative, and that derivative cannot be reversed back to my thing, right? So in that case, and then delete the actual iris scan from the device, right? You have a choice. So in that case, it's basically then what will happen with that derivative of the biometric signature of my iris is when it's me again using it, then they will basically check against, again, they will generate that derivative, that signature, and compare against that. That's zero knowledge proof, right? The way they have done it is, the option is very interesting. The option that you select in the World app, as they call it, is, do you want to improve the Worldcoin service? If you say yes, then they send the whole iris scan as well. That probably is a bit cheeky. So you need to, when you are actually using zero knowledge proof or getting some sort of consent, you need to inform the user, not like hiding behind, oh, do you want to help Worldcoin or World ID improve the thing? Instead of say that, hey, if you select that, then we are going to store your iris scan. Do you really want it? Yes, no.
Yeah, that's interesting that they've done it that way. Because I think that when I've ever seen like people talk about Worldcoin from a perspective where they're not sure about it, I think I saw like Vitalik Buterin founder of Ethereum, write a blog post about it, and he was like seeing the orbs as the main issue, that hardware device, and that potentially being a potential place where information could be taken from. And like you said, if you're actually sending your biometrics back through and you're not really consciously making that decision, you're thinking you're helping out, but you're not actually sending your information back across the internet, that's definitely, you're going to lose trust of people that way. So it's a shame that they've done it that way. But it's interesting that you've gone through that experience, because I think quite often people read stuff online and they just say, yeah, I'm not interested, but it's good of you to have actually gone through the experience and make your own mind up about it. And you talked about some of the other innovations that kind of particularly excite you about the space. Are there any others?
One other thing I will mention, which is exciting, and we need to be careful on that. Again, it's pointing towards the same, that we have to move towards passive authentication. And earlier I was mentioning that the acceleration is at an unprecedented stage, right? We all got very excited about ChatGPT last year in November, and rightly so, because it changed and disrupted almost every businesses, right? from content writing to students started to use it, and it challenged the identity space as well through generative AI, right? All these phishing messages and also biometrics. Now, if we think or see a bit deeper into that, even let's take an example of the evolution that happened of ChatGPT. So ChatGPT was based on GPT 3.5 model, right? GPT-4 came out in May this year, and March this year, right? And basically, it was an evolution of that, right? It added images as well, and it was shown as much more powerful than the previous one. Now GPT-4 is based on 8,000 tokens. What does that mean is, the prompt that we write in the ChatGPT, that's actually how many words we can use is decided by the number of tokens they use. So roughly it is 0.75 times the number of tokens used by the model. So 8,000 times 0.75 is around 6,000 words. So you can use 6,000 words to type the prompt. And the better the prompt, as you know, there are like jobs right now, they're called prompt engineering, right? It becomes so much kind of into the mainstream. So you can write around 6,000 words to create a piece of phishing text or create an image which looks like me or you. But something happened in July. 20th of July, Microsoft Research published a paper. It's called LongNet. So it's an evolution of the transformer framework, which is used by ChatGPT, or rather GPT. And they introduced a framework or a mechanism called dilated attention. So the transformer paper was actually called All You Need Is Attention. So the transformer actually is based on the attention model in AI. So this new paper, which came out last month, talks about dilated attention. Beyond those nitty-gritty things, the important thing is they now claim that now they can use 1 billion tokens. And then you can calculate the number of words that can be used, right? So 8,000 token, which is disrupting everything, to 1 billion token within few months, right? So now you can actually type a whole book, or maybe more than many books, into the prompt, and what it will come out as an output is we cannot even imagine. So that is going to disrupt even more, right? So we need to be kind of aware of the challenges which are coming out from there. And we need to utilize the same AI models to, solve the problems as well. So I guess the most exciting thing at the moment for me, at least for the next few months or maybe a year, is how AI is evolving. Very especially generative AI is evolving, and how we can actually use it. Because on the other side, the fraudsters will use the same, right? So we need to be one step ahead.
Like an arms race, isn't it?
It is.
Final question for me, Gautam. Do you see any way in which mobile identity and decentralized identity technology can work together? How can they work in harmony to fend off some of the concerns that we have about AI, for example?
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. And thanks for asking that, right? So I have been working on decentralized identity in my previous world in GSMA. We did some POCs as well, demonstrated in Mobile World Congress as well. First of all, I'll say one of the, and decentralized identity and SSI is absolutely brilliant. That's where, that conceptually, that's where it should move to. But I think we need to solve one of the fundamental business problem. I think conceptually it's absolutely brilliant. Technology is there. WTC is doing, brilliant job. Trust over IP is doing a brilliant job. One of the basic business challenge here is if you see how the identity ecosystem is working now, right? It may not be perfect, but the business can sustain. So there is an identity provider, whether you use the classic siloed identity or the federation identity model, or even some sort of distributed identity model. there's an identity provider. That identity provider could be the mobile operators, could be the governments, could be the banks through open banking. They are becoming identity providers as well, and so on, right? In some cases, social media as well, although the value of that identity is a bit we can all understand. But still, they're identity providers of different values and weightages. And then there is, so they are the value providers, and then there's the value consumers, which are the relying parties, the service providers, right? The enterprises, the banks who wants to, get enough confidence on my identity through the identity providers. And I am that subject or the entity. So how does the value chain works? The value consumer, who are the relying parties, they use the identity provided by the identity providers. They are the value providers. You count the number of times they actually use that, and you give them an invoice, they pay it, off you go, right? Simple. That's how the business transaction works. Let's see how it is right now in the decentralized identity. You don't have identity providers, rightly so. You have issuers. Then you have verifiers, and you have the holder, me as that. Perfectly fine. So the issuer issues the verifiable credential. It sits in the holder's wallet. It sits with me. Then the issuer is not in the transaction dance. The value consumer, who is the verifier, comes to me, gets whatever they want. They want age verification, fine. They get it. They want, my address to be verified, fine. They do it. The blockchain infrastructure, if it exists, helps in that cryptographic dance to verify it. All fine. But then, how will we incentivize the issuer? Why should they give that to me? Because they are not even in the transaction chain. Technically, it can be solved, but until we solve that incentivization of the issuer, it's not a sustainable business, right? Technically, there are a lot many solutions that we can actually create a smart contract within the ecosystem to do it. So that's a challenge right now. I actually asked it and raised it during this year's Mobile World Congress. And basically the general consensus was, yes, we accept that's a problem. Let's solve it, right? Which means that's not yet solved. So that if we can solve that, that's the way to go. Now, mobile operators can definitely participate, right? Anyone who were or who are an identity provider can become an identity issuer straight away. That's a natural transition. But why should they do that? What is the incentive, right? How do they get incentivized in doing that? If you solve that, they will participate. They have valuable data, right? That's what our business is in Sekura.id. We are actually pulling in 66 potential 66 data signals are there from the mobile operator to have enough confidence in the identity, right? They all can be put in the holder's wallet as verifiable credential, and then they are signed by the mobile operator. So there is end-to-end trust there. But we just need to solve that business problem, and it's not difficult to solve. We just need to talk and solve it from a business perspective, not a purist perspective.
It's really interesting. I'm not saying too much because we're actually kind of working on the verifier pays issuer problem ourselves right now. But if I say too much, I think my product team would probably kill me later on today. So I'm going to hold my tongue, but I think you're absolutely right. I think it's one of the biggest kind of business issues to be solved. We had a podcast with Marie Wallace from Accenture that I think went out just this week, and she highlighted that same issue. So when you're seeing a number of great minds, and of course you're discussing it at Mobile World Congress, it's definitely an issue that's at the forefront of many people's minds. But yeah, it's really interesting timing that you bring that up as well, Gautam. But listen, for me, this has been a great episode. We haven't really delved too much into the mobile side of identity as much as this before. So I feel like I've learned as much as our listeners have. So I really appreciate your time in doing that. Is there anything else that you want to say before we wrap up, or any kind of URLs that you can pass along where our listeners can catch up with what you've been working on?
Absolutely. So from Sekura.id, we are all very, very passionate about identity. That's the common thread across all. And our vision is to solve the identity crisis, not just for the problems that we are seeing, but any future problems as well. So let's face it, all these identity issues we were talking about right now, the most critical of those are financial, right? That's where we want to stop in most of the cases. There are others as well related to privacy. But the maximum harm that it can do to me is a financial issue. Very bad, but still, that's the maximum harm. Now we have connected all these things as well in the same internet without the identity layer, right? And the implications are beyond financial. So just imagine there's a connected pacemaker and it has got an identity as well, right? And then I'll not name them, but one of the most popular connected pacemaker makers, they had an identity issue because they were using passwords, and then the password was left as default passwords. You can think of the implications, right? The fraudsters, when they take over the identity of that, they can actually create life and death situation. They can stop the pacemaker or increase it to 200 beats per second, right? Same can happen with connected cars. Someone can actually, if we don't solve the identity problem, they can disable the brakes, right? So what we believe is we need to solve the fundamental problem. This is what we are working on in Sekura.id, and that's why we have actually rebranded ourselves. Previously, we were Sekura Mobile Intelligence. We have thought that the problem needs to be solved in totality, so now have rebranded us as Sekura.id. We want to solve the problem not just in the space where is the normal internet or web. We want to solve it in the Internet of Things as well. And there is something coming up. I published an article just yesterday. I am calling it Internet of Thoughts, but maybe that's for the future. The problem is getting accelerated even further than Internet of Things, right? So what I envisage is we, instead of short-term fixes and creating implementation which still add value, we may need to, as an industry, as leaders, as thought leaders, we need to join hands from different verticals and solve the identity problem forever, because who knows what AI will bring in tomorrow, right? And we need to always catch up. Instead of that, let's solve the identity crisis and create the identity layer.
Yeah, fantastic. And I love the tease, Gautam, there about Internet of Thoughts. Maybe it's something that we can get you back on in a couple of years' time. Our AIs will be able to talk about that together. But
sure.
Gautam Hazari, thank you very much for coming on Identi3.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for having me. Thank you.